Erin, Burnett, Outfront starts right now.
Outfront next, breaking news. The January 6th Select Committee releasing text messages tonight between Sean Hannity and Trump's White House. One message, a warning, sent hours before the insurrection itself. It comes as we're learning the committee now wants to speak to the former Vice President Mike Pence. Good evening, I'm Erin Burnett. Out front tonight, I begin with the breaking news. A chilling warning. CNN learning the January 6th Select Committee has obtained damning text messages between Trump's White House and one of Trump's closest TV confidants, Sean Hannity. One of the messages was a warning. The day before the insurrection, Hannity texting he was, quote, very worried about the next 48 hours. Now, the messages, we understand, were all sent in the days and weeks leading up to January 6th and in the immediate days of its aftermath. And now the committee wants to hear from Hannity about these conversations. Conversations that obviously are now key to what Trump's White House knew about January 6th. So according to the committee, the message Hannity sent, the one that said he was, quote, very worried about the next 48 hours, was one of a number of messages that he exchanged with Trump's inner circle on that evening of January 5th. Again, right, just to make it clear, the night before everything happened. To state an obvious and important truth, what we see and what we see in these messages from Hannity could very clearly contradict what Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, has claimed publicly.
They've been making the argument that it was this pre-planned idea that we had, and not only have I said publicly that no one in the West Wing had any advance knowledge that any breach of security at the Capitol was going to happen.
Okay, well, the committee also says it has evidence that Hannity may have spoken directly with Trump on January 5th and on January 10th. That is when the committee says that Hannity sent Meadows and Congressman Jim Jordan this message. And I quote, guys, we have a clear path to land the plane in 9 days. He can't mention the election again, ever. I did not have a good call with him today. And worse, I'm not sure what is left to do or say, and I don't feel like it's truly understood. Ideas? Well, it's been almost a year since that day. Trump continues to mention the election, saying the real insurgency was actually on the day of the election, and it's rigged and fraudulent, and, that's what he does every single chance he gets a chance to do it. This is coming as the panel's chairman reveals to CNN that he now wants to hear directly from Mike Pence in the investigation into January 6th, Trump's former vice president.
I would hope that he would do the right thing and come forward and voluntarily talk to the committee.
So we don't know what Pence is going to do. Of course, he was there on the day of the insurrection, right, overseeing the vote. And as the rioters were chanting, hang Mike Pence. Now, it is not clear if Pence will cooperate. But what is clear is that, since Pence did go ahead and certify the results, Trump has made it clear he is no fan of Pence.
I think Mike has been very badly hurt by what took place with respect to January 6th. I think he's been mortally wounded, frankly, because I see the reaction he's getting from people. They say, why didn't you just hand it back to the legislatures? Why didn't you do that?
Mortally wounded. Well, Pence, for his part, has made it clear he is not on the same page with Trump when it comes to that dark day.
January 6th was a dark day in the history of the United States Capitol. President Trump and I have spoken many times since we left office. And I don't know if we'll ever see eye to eye on that day.
Paula Reed begins our coverage out front live in Washington. And Paula, a lot of big developments tonight here. What more are you learning about the messages to Hannity to and from, right, that what's in them and how significant this is for the committee at this time?
Another busy day for the January 6th committee, Erin, and it's so interesting that they're seeking Sean Hannity's voluntary cooperation with their investigation. And it appears that their interest in him as a potential witness has arisen out of the materials that they collected from former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows before he ceased cooperating with their investigation. They say that the text messages that they have to and from the former White House Chief of Staff suggest that Hannity may have had advance knowledge of what Trump and his legal team were going to do on January 6th. But it's interesting when you dig into these text messages to learn more about the role Hannity was playing within this inner circle. The committee says it has text messages from Hannity pushing back on this plan to urge Congress to reject or challenge the certification of election results. And instead, Hannity was urging Trump to leave office and prepare to enter a new role where he would become the voice of voting reform, noting that when he speaks, people listen. It's interesting. He was sort of coming up with a post-White House strategy for Trump instead of telling him to fight, fight, fight. Now, the committee acknowledges, though, in its letter to Hannity that it could potentially run into some First Amendment problems here, going after someone who is a broadcaster, of course, his day job. But the committee insists they are not looking for anything related to Hannity's broadcasting, though at this point it's unclear if he will voluntarily cooperate or if they'll have to move to subpoena him. His attorney, Jay Sekulow, has said that they are reviewing the letter and will respond as appropriate.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting because obviously the tone and everything of those texts, right, that was just friendly, right? Those were conversations he was having to friends. Thank you very much. I appreciate it so much. Paul's giving us all that new detail. Let's go to our chief political analyst now, Gloria Borger, and Laura Coates, former federal prosecutor. So, Gloria, what are the chances Hannity cooperates?
I don't know. I texted with Jay Sekulow, and he didn't give away any secrets. He said he's Hannity's attorney, and he said, look, we're reviewing this. The committee was so careful in their request because Hannity is, after all, a broadcaster on television every night. And they're worried about First Amendment concerns, obviously. And then, first of all, they said, we want you to cooperate voluntarily. We're not going to ask you about the things you say on TV. We're not going to ask you about any commentary you may have made. And obviously, these aren't issues of privilege, of course, because he was texting other people inside the White House. What's so stunning to me, though, is that it's clear that Hannity was saying to them, stop this. Stop this. Let him go off to Florida and become a spokesman for election reform. Don't talk about the election anymore. And how worried he was about January 6th. So we know that there were some plans that he was worried about. Well, what were they? What concerned him so much? That's what the committee is trying to find out.
I mean, it is incredible, right? I mean, he can't mention the election ever again, period, ever, period. I did not have a good call with him today. I mean, there's no ambiguity about that. Laura, according to the committee, Hannity wrote one of these texts to Meadows, and it was on New Year's Eve 2020. And he's talking about, at that point, right, the White House counsel's office is falling apart, right, as Trump is trying to find people to overturn the election. Hannity writes, we can't lose the entire White House counsel's office. I do not see January 6th happening the way he is being told. After the 6th, he should announce he will lead the nationwide effort to reform voting integrity, go to Florida and watch Joe mess up daily, stay engaged. When he speaks, people will listen. Obviously, that's not what happened, Laura, but how important is the fact that that message was sent when it was sent?
Oh, it's critically important, Erin. I mean, the idea that he's anticipating the very thing that shocked the entire world, the idea that somehow it was some sort of a spontaneous combustion event where everyone happened to gather coincidentally. It shows that there was some planning, that they were aware of it, that at least the person he was communicating with anticipated this would actually happen on January 6th, which of course it belies a lot of what we've heard already from discussions about flat-footedness and the shock and how could anyone absolutely prepare for this. If he was aware at that point in time that January 6th, as we now know it, was coming, that does not bode well about any argument whatsoever that suggests that they were completely blindsided by it. Also, the idea of how did you think it was going to go? The notion that this was an idea of him going back to Florida, conceding that he actually had lost the election. And that last statement there of saying, when you talk, people will listen. Well, that really foreshadows another very key moment that the committee has already talked about. The idea of people trying to implore the president of the United States at that time, Donald Trump, to stop because of his influence, because of the extraordinary influence on the people who were actually at the Capitol that day. So all of these things really corroborate. So we already know to have had what happened here, that it wasn't coincidental, that there was advance notice, that there was some anticipation of this event. Now, whether they knew the lengths it would actually go that day, of course, remains to be seen. But this demonstrates that there was some prior knowledge, facilitation, strategizing, and planning of the event that was an attack, a physical attack on the citadel of our democracy, and also an ideological attack on the integrity of our elections.
So Gloria, this brings us now to what Benny Thompson, the chair of the committee, is saying, right? That they now want to hear directly from former Vice President Mike Pence. Now, I understand, of course, that makes complete sense, right? But, Pence was the former vice president. Anyone at his, level of importance has not cooperated, and obviously he was central to this. So a month ago, he was asked whether he would cooperate with the committee. He said, quote, "We'll evaluate any of those requests as they come." What are the chances that Pence actually comes in and answers questions and doesn't claim executive privilege or anything like that?
Well, I think obviously he would. It's very difficult with Pence because obviously there are conversations that he had with the President of the United States as Vice President that would be privileged. But one thing we ought to keep in mind here, I don't know the answer to your direct question, to be honest. What I do know is that Team Pence, people who worked with Mike Pence, are talking to the committee.
Yeah.
Some have been subpoenaed. I mean, there's been a subpoena. Others are coming in voluntarily. So I think that if you don't talk to Mike Pence, you will get a pretty good idea, a very good idea of what was happening that day and before that day and after that day, because there were people who were always with the vice president. I mean, he doesn't travel alone. We know there were people with him inside the Capitol. So you'll get an idea. And I don't know if the committee, what Benny Thompson told Ryan Nobles is very interesting because, of course, they want to hear from him. The question is whether they get into an issue with the former vice president. I don't know the answer to that yet. And I don't know whether they're going to have to because there's other ways of gleaning that exact
which is really important. Laura, one other thing, we've just learned that the former president, Trump, everyone, I don't know if anyone watching this knows this, but many people do. I want to make sure everyone does. He had announced he was going to have a press conference on the anniversary of the insurrection. And I think there were a lot of people who said, even knowing that he has upped the ante on fraud and rigged and all that, to do that on that day was significant. And now all of a sudden, he's just come out a few moments ago and canceled that press conference. Laura, why do you think, I don't know who's behind that or what happened, but this isn't something he usually does, to back down and do that. What do you think the reason could be when you look at everything circling around him?
Well, the reason should be that it's an extraordinarily poor taste. And to the extent that the committee's revelations have pointed a finger right at the former president of the United States, if they're suggesting that he was somehow complicit in what happened as well, the idea that he would hold a press conference in some way to not commemorate it as what was antithetical to our democracy, but somehow a pat on the back or promoting further this already metastasized big lie. And of course, it's odd that he would do it, knowing that Speaker Pelosi and others have already said they're going to have events as well to commemorate not as an extraordinary triumph, but as the tragedy of what could have befallen our democracy that day. I'm shocked that he would want to shy away from that level of competition. But it's also the idea here that everything he can and says could be used against him, not only in a court of law. Remember, the Supreme Court presently is looking at the case about the National Archives, figuring out whether or not, in that checks and balancing notion, whether there's a cost-benefit analysis of having this transparency. Everything he says could inure to the benefit of the committee. And just this president has no privilege on these issues, no extensive privilege on these issues, and then whatever he says could go against him in front of the Supreme Court of the United States. Maybe his counsel told him to zip it or risk actually having all those documents come to light, which I assume will not bode well for him.
It does seem to indicate that there is some sort of concern or fear about what's going on there. All right, thank you both so much. I appreciate your time.
Thanks.
And next, breaking news, Trump targeted in 2 new lawsuits tonight. Police officers who responded to the January 6th attack and a showdown over keeping schools open. One of the most powerful teacher unions threatening a walkout over Chicago's decision to keep kids in school. This as President Biden remains defiant on his push to keep schools open. And the CDC again updating its guidance for people with COVID. So when can people who test positive when are you allowed to come back out?